I want to thank, first of all, Karen Sigeman for inviting us all here and organizing this terrific conference. It's a great pleasure for me to be back here again with the American Freedom Alliance. I was here a couple years ago and had a terrific time meeting a lot of you here. And, Larry and Rebecca have terrific messages. And I look at American Freedom Alliance as our megaphone to get this message out to as many people as possible, not only through your live stream, but through each and every one of you who can use whatever information that all of us have to offer to talk to your friends, talk to your people in your neighborhoods, go to the school board meetings, go to anybody who might have an influence on any of the things that Rebecca and Larry talked about in order to change things. Because it's just like, because I work in a think tank, the worst thing in the world is to write a study that sits on the shelf that no one does anything about. And so hopefully all of you will be able to make sure that there's no dust on our information that we get out here today. Larry was, first of all, I wanted to just mention that, David Horowitz this morning said that he had written a book and nobody wrote a review about it. Well, I actually write a column, now a regular column for the Daily Caller, which I'm sure some of you read. And one of my very first columns was to actually write a review of Standing Up to Goliath. So my advice to all of you is to get this book now, go out and buy it on Amazon or with Rebecca's boxes here. And I want to thank Larry also for mentioning my other book. This is like a book show, actually, the Corrupt Classroom. Thanks, Larry, for that shout out. One of the things that I just mentioned from that book, and I wasn't going to talk about it, but Larry pulled out some interesting anecdotes about teachers doing very bad things, in terms of indoctrination or bias. But that bias goes, a lot further. Yes, it goes to things like Howard Zinn's books, but if you look at, for example, the 11th grade history and social studies curriculum, the reason why David Horowitz is, talking about how students, believe what they believe is because if you look at the social studies and history curriculum guidelines in California, which are supposed to serve as the guidelines for all educators here in the state, you find out that for example, the discussion of the Cold War, when the discussion comes up to the Red China's Great Leap Forward, which was the forced communization of agriculture in China, and which resulted in the deaths of 45 million ordinary Chinese people, and it resulted in the countryside in parents actually not just selling their kids, but actually boiling and eating their children in order to survive. Now, if you look at how that is described in the history and social studies curriculum guidelines here in California, it's simply referred to as causing disruption in China. No mention of the fact that tens of millions of people died because of it. No mention, for example, of the fact, as David Horowitz mentioned, that ultimately 60, 70 million people died in China under the communist brutality there, and it continues to this day. That's another thing, that we still have communist China with us, giving us, it's the gift that continues to give, right? Anyway, so there's the march of the left has been the march through the teachers' unions. It's been the march through the curriculum. It's been the march through our institutions. What I want to do today is give you a little bit of hope, actually, at the end of our presentation. Larry did mention that I've just written this new book, actually. It's called Choosing Diversity, How Charter Schools Promote Diverse Learning Models and Meet the Diverse Needs of Parents and Children. And I decided to use the title, Choosing Diversity, because I wanted to use the left's language against them. Because the left is always talking about the importance of diversity in America, right? But they have weaponized that word. So that when they talk about diversity, it means to push policies such as open borders or race-based affirmative action, or all kinds of identity politics, right? But when it comes to diversity in the choice of schools, all of a sudden the left hates diversity and wants a one-size-fits-all system of unionized public schools. One of the things that the left does not want is charter schools. Why? Because those schools are often non-unionized and they're independent of the school districts. They have greater flexibility over their curriculum, who they hire as teachers, and they generally are much freer from the rules and regulations that government sets down for the regular public schools. Now, in exchange for this autonomy, they have to actually meet the needs of their children, which is an incredible concept, right? I mean, whereas the regular public schools can go on years and decades, forever, miseducating their children with no consequences whatsoever for their failed programs. If you fail as a charter school, then you can actually go out of business, because your charter comes up for renewal time and time again, periodically, and if you don't meet the needs of your kids, then you get dechartered. And so many parents in California have chosen charter schools. There are 1,300 charter schools actually here in California, and the reason why parents choose these schools is, actually, a myriad of reasons. It's not just because they want their kids to perform better academically in the classroom. Yes, they do want that. They actually do want, as Larry pointed out, they do want their children to learn math, as opposed to what under Common Core is happening in most regular public schools. They're learning about math. So, yeah, under Common Core, it's not whether you get the right answer or not, it's about how you got the answer, even if it's incorrect, as long as you use the right pathway that Common Core says they want you to do. Parents, though, choose charter schools because, in addition to the academics, they choose them because a lot of them, in my book, when I interviewed kids, it was because they wanted a safe environment in which to learn. You can't learn and perform well academically if you don't feel safe. One of the kids I interviewed at a charter school up in Bakersfield said that the reason why he wanted to attend this charter school was because, and now we're talking fourth graders, right? Because at his previous regular public elementary school, there was a shooting on campus. Somebody had decided to break into the school office. The police showed up and they shot the guy. And so that caused an incredible trauma on that child. And so when I was interviewing him for my book, he was giving me the most incredible lowdown on why this charter school, called Grimway Academy Charter School in the little town of Shafter outside of Bakersfield, was so much safer than his regular public school. He went through how they locked the gates, how they let people in, who could access the parking lot, who could do this, who could do that. And this is from a fourth grader. Think about how scared that kid was in his previous unsafe regular public school, and then ask him to try and learn math. All right? They can't. And so I profile in my book 13 very different charter schools. The thing about charter schools is they're not just different from regular public schools, they're different from one another. Very different from one another. I'm going to just talk to you about one of them right now, because it is very different from what Rebecca and Larry have been talking about in their presentations. It's called John Adams Academy. And John Adams Academy is located outside of Sacramento and serves kids from kindergarten through 12th grade. And it was one of the late schools that I added to my book. In fact, I only became aware of the school when I was walking outside the state capitol, a few months ago, and I happened to run into Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, who is the Republican vice chair of the Assembly Education Committee. And Kevin Kiley, for those of you who don't know, he represents a district up in Northern California, but he is truly one of the rising stars in the Republican Party, a solid education conservative who really knows what he's doing, and he had been actually a teacher prior to becoming a politician. And so look for him in the future. But anyway, I ran into him and he said, "Did you know about John Adams Academy?" And I said, "No." And he said, you have to visit it. So I called up the school and I got there, and I was really blown away by what I saw. First thing I get there at 8 o'clock, the bell rings, the kids pour out of the school buildings, gather around the flagpole, and they start singing a patriotic song. They sang "Home on the Range." I had not heard "Home on the Range" in 50 years. And they were great. And every morning starts off with a different patriotic song. The school's mission and vision statement says that John Adams Academy is restoring America's heritage by developing servant leaders and defenders of the principles of freedom for which the founding fathers pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. America's heritage, says the school, is a tradition of a free society of self-governing citizens. And a free society is necessary for true human flourishing and is grounded in what? The principles of liberty and freedom embodied in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights. Dr. Dean Foreman, who's the co-founder of John Adams Academy, said that when the school's organizers held their first informational meeting, they expected just a handful of parents to show up because John Adams Academy is in a suburb of Sacramento that is supposedly one of the good school districts. And so why would you leave a good school to go to a school like this? So they figured they put out a few folding chairs and, maybe hopefully enough parents would come out to fill those chairs. They got 1,000 people who showed up in this good school district. There were so many cars lined up to get into the parking lot where this meeting was being held. It had spread through the city onto the interstate. The police had to be called because they was like, what the hell's going on here? So Dr. Foreman says the key is that their parents love the emphasis on the founding era and the belief that it's okay to believe that America is a great place and to be patriots. So the school has 10 core values, including fostering America's national heritage, fostering creativity and entrepreneurship, and high standards of academic excellence. I had the opportunity to speak there on Veterans Day. I served 5 years as a member of the California State Military Reserve, and I am also, for the past 8 years, I've been the president of the U.S. Army's Community Relations Board for Northern California. So they invited me to speak there, and I am telling you, I have seen so many Veterans Day observations, but I don't think I ever saw one more moving and heartfelt than the one I saw at John Adams Academy. Those kids who came up, and they had invited all these veterans to the school, those kids who came up to speak to the veterans and recount the sacrifices of Americans' veterans through the ages was unbelievable. And it wasn't just kids reciting something in rote. They had really done their homework, and they really felt what they were talking about. And for me, one of the great things was they had the school choir sing a whole medley of armed forces songs. And my father is a veteran of the United States Coast Guard. And, that's one of the unsung services, right? You always think the Army, Navy, and Marines, right, and the Air Force, but no one thinks of the Coast Guard. These kids sang Semper Paratus, which is a Coast Guard anthem. And I have never heard the Coast Guard anthem sung so well as these kids. So I actually afterwards had them sing it again, and I recorded it on my phone. I took it back to my dad, who's 89 years old now, and I said, "Dad, when was the last time you heard the Coast Guard song?" And he said, "Probably since he was in the Coast Guard during the Korean War." And so I showed it to him. My dad cried but that's the kind of thing that charter schools can develop. I would say one last thing, because I know I'm coming to the end. One last thing. John Adams Academy doesn't want to keep this just in that suburb. They want to expand. They are growing. They are planting new schools, around the state. But the thing that's going to stop them is Rebecca's friends over at the teachers' unions. The California Teachers Association has a whole slew of anti-charter school bills that are right now fermenting up in Sacramento. And because the Democrats have a supermajority, and because the California Teachers Association endorsed Gavin Newsom for governor, they think they have a real slick road to enactment of these laws that they've been trying to push through for years, but, to give credit where credit is due, Jerry Brown vetoed them. But now with Gavin Newsom in the governor's office, there may be a change. And so what I would suggest is that as an action item, take a look at the Charter School Development Center, which is probably the best organization when it comes to tracking the developments of charter school legislation in California. The Charter School Development Center, they have a whole list of action items revolving around these bills. Because if we all go, when we hear about what's going on at John Adams Academy, but if these bills pass, there won't be any more John Adams Academies. And not only will there be no more, those that are in existence will start to fall apart because of the laws to make those schools be more like regular public schools. And so if we want to save charter schools, but more importantly, save our children and give choice to parents, we've got to act now, within the next few months. So I urge all of you to do that. We'll be sending out papers on all of our presentations, and I'll have those action items. So I appreciate your kind attention today. Thanks.